Craftsman days are here at Lowe's with big savings on the tools you need. Save $100 on the Craftsman V20 6-tool power tool combo kit, now at $199. No matter what the project is, Craftsman's high-quality, high-performance products empower you to build on. Stop by your nearest Lowe's store and check out the full line of Craftsman tools today. Valid through 6/18 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
There's a cheap and easy lab test that can give you a lot of information about your risk for scary things like heart attack, stroke, dementia, brain shrinkage, osteoporosis, and more. It could save your life, but most doctors won't order it unless you ask them to because they don't know what to do with the results. But you're about to. Let's talk about homocysteine. You're listening to the Health Courage Collective podcast, episode 205, Homocysteine, a lab test worth asking for. Welcome to the Health Courage Collective podcast, the show for women who are too busy to slog through hours of generalized, inapplicable, and often contradictory health information, but too smart to ignore that a few minutes of focused attention now can prevent years of suffering in the future. I'm your host, Christina Hackett, a pharmacist who doesn't want you to live on prescriptions, a certified coach specifically trained to maximize your potential, and a compulsive learner obsessed with preventative, cutting-edge, holistic, and integrative medicine. I'm on a mission to increase your physical and mental resilience so you can fearlessly look forward to your next 40-plus limitless years. Your time is now. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. So happy you're here today. How are you? How's your perfection going? Did you find perfection hiding where only humble people can find it? I love that definition of perfection, but even more, I think it's the only real perfection we're ever going to achieve in this life. Today, we're going to talk about a lab test result that I think it's useful for you to know about. Even if you're not going to get your blood drawn in the next few weeks, having this knowledge in the back of your mind next time you do will help you reduce your risk of the two statistically most likely things to kill you or make you stop living before you die: cardiovascular disease like a heart attack or stroke, and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. And most doctors don't understand its importance and how to use the result to reduce your health risk. Well, getting your blood drawn is never very fun, sitting in that one-armed chair, getting the rubber tourniquet thingy strapped on till a vein gets big enough to easily spot, pumping your fist, and if you're like me, looking away when the needle goes in, even though I don't consider myself to be scared of needles at all. There are several things you and your doctor want to be checking to make sure your risk of the chronic diseases of aging that you don't want to get are low. One of those things is called homocysteine. It's a tricky one, though, because while high homocysteine is most definitely correlated with increased risk of heart attack, stroke, blood clots, all kinds of dementia, and more, lowering it doesn't decrease those things from happening. Weird. I won't bore you with all the details, but just really quickly, homocysteine is a kind of amino acid that is not the kind of amino acid that forms proteins. Proteins are made up of 20 different amino acid building blocks, and there are about 1,000 other amino acids that don't build proteins, and homocysteine is one of them. Homocysteine contains sulfur, and it's involved in several critical metabolic pathways. I haven't heard of anyone having too low of homocysteine levels, but I suppose that that's possible. But too high levels of homocysteine is what you want to look for because they're an indication of an increased risk of over 100 diseases, which is crazy. I've always thought of high homocysteine as being an indicator of increased risk of cardiovascular disease, but it turns out that it's way more than just that. When the link between high homocysteine and cardiovascular disease started to be appreciated in the 90s, drug companies were all over trying to make expensive drugs to lower homocysteine. You can do it pretty effectively with vitamins B6 and a little bit B12 and B9. It's well established that high homocysteine is a risk factor for cardiovascular and other diseases. But then the studies that methodically lowered homocysteine to acceptable levels failed to show an outcome of reduced cardiovascular mortality. So that's not good. It made the whole homocysteine business weird and confusing. Hey, here's this thing that shows that you are more likely to drop dead from a blood clot, stroke, heart attack, mental illness, fracture, kidney disease, or dementia. But lowering it's not going to save you. Sorry. That's pretty crappy. The current American Heart Association guidelines don't recommend checking or trying to treat homocysteine levels, essentially saying that high homocysteine puts you at higher risk, but there's nothing you can do about it. I think if you want to lower your risk of blood clots, stroke, heart attack, mental illness, fracture, kidney disease, and dementia, you need to know more about what homocysteine is telling you. Typical homocysteine levels are 10 to 12 micromoles per liter. I think you know by now that normal is not optimal. Once your little blood tube gets sent off to the lab in a creepy white van and you get your results on your online portal or through your doctor's office, you're diagnosed with hyperhomocysteinemia if your level is over 15. Men tend to naturally have higher levels than women, so while 9 to 12 is considered totally normal, it's not good enough for you. Women want their level to be 6 to 8. 9 or above is a clue that something somewhere isn't working quite right, increasing your risk of 100 different diseases. According to Dr. Pamela Wharton-Smith, women with elevated homocysteine and high blood pressure together are 25 times more likely to have a heart attack or stroke. Not 25%, 25 times. That's 2,500%. Enormous. I'm sure you know that you shouldn't smoke because smokers are twice as likely to have a heart attack or stroke. 2 times more likely. But high blood pressure plus high homocysteine is 25 times more likely. She also says that high homocysteine puts you at an increased risk for osteoporosis by interfering with collagen cross-linking, leading to a defective bone matrix that isn't strong enough. I had no idea about that, but I definitely don't want a defective bone matrix. And there's a lot of new interesting evidence about how much of an increased risk you're at for dementia and other mental health issues and like brain shrinkage if you have high homocysteine levels. In episode 165, we talked about uric acid and how knowing your uric acid level teaches you way more about your overall health than just your risk for gout. I think homocysteine can be a similar kind of teacher. And it's more informative as part of a bigger picture of a whole set of labs. If your homocysteine level is high and you have high blood pressure or high ApoB cholesterol boats, like we talked about in episode 171, The Real Deal with Cholesterol, or poor omega-3 levels, which most people do, or you're not very sensitive to insulin, it's time to be very productively concerned because trouble is brewing. And more importantly, there's something you can do about it. Homocysteine may be a bad actor on its own, causing oxidative stress and impairing the production of nitric oxide. We talked all about nitric oxide back in episode 9. If you want to understand it, go back and listen to that one. It's an amazing molecule, and your health gets worse and worse the lower yours gets, especially the health of your endothelium, which we talked about in episode 178. Healthy endothelium means low risk of heart attack and stroke and lots of other problems. There was also a study called the VITA-COG study, which is a cutesy name, VITA and COG, showing that if you have high homocysteine and you lower it, your risk of cognitive decline and brain atrophy is reduced. It's postulated that homocysteine does a couple of bad things in your brain, adding to the production of tau tangles and impairing your ability to put omega-3 lipids where they should be in your brain, which is an important thing. The VITA-COG study showed that directly lowering homocysteine was most beneficial in the people with the highest omega-3 levels. So to protect your brain, you need high omega-3 levels. But we already knew that. Homocysteine levels are typically quite high if you have kidney dysfunction. Kidney dysfunction may or may not be something that you can do something about, but if you can, your homocysteine levels will probably improve as your kidney function improves. Another and more common reason for having high homocysteine levels is probably having a genetic variant of the MTHFR enzyme that results in you not being able to methylate things well. If you're bored, stick with me. I think this matters. Without boring you to death about what methylation is or why it matters, just know that some people have this inherited genetic trait where they can't move little molecular groups consisting of 1 carbon and 3 hydrogen atoms around efficiently. I'm pretty sure I have this genetic condition. I remember way back around maybe 1999-ish, I got an email from my cousin Teresa, who lives in Washington, D.C., saying that she had had a stroke as a healthy young woman who had just given birth to a healthy little baby girl. So she went to a specialist who did a test and told her that she had methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase deficiency. She was letting me know because all of the people on our Nielsen side of the family seemed to die of blood clot-related incidents, and she wanted me to know about it so that I could protect myself if possible. My dad had a stroke in 2005, and his dad died of a stroke in the 70s. My dad's sister had a pulmonary embolism, and there's some other blood clotty Nielsen family issues, along with other Nielsen family issues. Anyhow, I memorized that term, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase deficiency, and I thought I had this rare, obscure knowledge that made me so super special. Then around 2010-ish, it seemed like everyone was talking about MTHFR and that I was in no way special for having that genetic issue. You might know about the MTHFR gene. You might know that you have a problem with yours, or you might have never heard of it. Doesn't matter. MTHFR is an enzyme that everyone has. The gene that codes for what your MTHFR enzyme is able to do has two variants that are so evenly spread throughout the population that the MTHFR expert Chris Masterjohn says that it's almost like we have 5 groups of genetic types. Not quite spread out as 20% in each of the 5 groups, but almost. The so-called top 20% group that is excellent at methylating usually has very low homocysteine and therefore lower inborn risk for blood clots, heart attacks, strokes, osteoporosis, dementia, etc. And the so-called worst 20% group, which is actually more like 10 to 15% of the population, has much higher homocysteine and therefore higher inborn risk for all of those diseases, which can be scary. And the other 60% of the population are on a spectrum from lowest risk to highest risk. People with the so-called worst case scenario for the MTHFR enzyme, which I think I do, but I've never been tested for, those people tend to have the highest homocysteine. It's not the only reason to have high homocysteine, but it's a pretty common reason to have high homocysteine and no other obvious risk factors for blood clots, heart attacks, strokes. We know people with high homocysteine are at an increased risk for 100 diseases, most noticeably catastrophic cardiovascular events. We know we can lower your homocysteine level with lots of vitamin B6, and we know that doing so doesn't seem to reduce your cardiovascular problems, to the point where the American Heart Association recommends not even checking it because it doesn't matter. So what gives here? Chris Masterjohn explains things really well, so I'll put a link in the show notes to an in-depth explanation of genetic MTHFR problems and what exactly is biochemically going on, if you're interested. But what he points out is that while vitamin B6 can help clear out homocysteine, it didn't fix the methylation problem at the level of the MTHFR enzyme. People in the so-called worst-case scenario do a poor job of using folate correctly. So they recycle homocysteine back to methionine, mostly using choline, which just means that they need to consume more choline than the rest of the population to keep things moving. You can find choline in eggs and other foods. He also says that people with the worst homocysteine levels and the so-called bad gene variant of MTHFR usually have poor riboflavin status. MTHFR is a riboflavin-dependent enzyme, so when people with MTHFR genetic variant have high homocysteine levels, doctors can come along and see the homocysteine levels and say, "Ha, you are at a significantly increased risk for these super scary cardiovascular events." And then they can get your homocysteine levels to go down by pumping you full of B6, which isn't dangerous, by the way, but it doesn't seem to reduce your risk for those scary diseases much. Why not? Dr. Masterjohn says that it's because they might have fixed your homocysteine clearance problem, but they didn't give you what you needed to help with your MTHFR enzyme problem. I think this is the missing link between why homocysteine matters so much, but lowering it hasn't seemed to change cardiovascular outcomes in studies. We need to know about how well your MTHFR enzyme is working. This is so important because we have this cheap and easy way to check if you're at an increased risk for very important things that can make you stop living before you die, like blood clots and brain shrinkage, but we don't use it because we don't know what to do about it if you are at an increased risk. If you're in the lowest 20% of the population at being able to methylate things, you should learn more about the MTHFR polymorphism from Chris Masterjohn. There's a link in the show notes that you can click on and start learning. You probably need B6, methylfolate, methyl B12, riboflavin, and maybe phosphatidylcholine, or to eat more eggs and meat and stuff. For how scary that genetic condition's risks are, it's actually pretty easy to fix with some safe and super inexpensive vitamins. And you also want good quality omega-3 supplements with DHA and EPA to protect your brain. But pretty much everyone needs that anyway, but it's super important if your homocysteine is high. Okay, do you feel way smarter? I hope so. Here's what I want you to take away from this episode. Your homocysteine level provides a valuable information about your risk for 100 different diseases, most noticeably blood clots, heart attacks, strokes, dementia, osteoporosis, and mental health problems. There's a good chance it won't get tested unless you ask for it. Lifestyle and your daily autopilot type habits are always queen, but high homocysteine is most often one of the rare risk factors that is purely based on your genetic luck. Your level can be high even if people should be taking notes about how you live the absolute healthiest life in the world. It's a risk factor that just a healthy lifestyle isn't going to correct. But there still is something easy you can do about it if your homocysteine level is high. It's a very easy and cheap measurement to add to just a standard blood test. Doctors have been told that measuring homocysteine levels doesn't matter because while it shows that you're at an increased risk, lowering it doesn't decrease that risk. But that's only because we've been dealing with homocysteine wrong. Homocysteine might in itself be somewhat dangerous, especially to your endothelium. But more importantly, homocysteine is a marker that something isn't working right somewhere else. And looking around for the reason why is absolutely worth your time. There's a reasonable chance that that something is your MTHFR enzyme. If you have high homocysteine and you don't have kidney disease, ask to have your MTHFR genes tested. If you have one of the genetic variants of the MTHFR enzyme that show that you are a poor methylator, learn more about that condition from Dr. Chris Masterjohn and others, and start taking the easily available cheap vitamins that will help that pathway work better. Everyone should probably get their EPA and DHA levels tested. Those are your omega-3 levels, but especially if you have high homocysteine. You need high omega-3 levels to protect your brain no matter what, but especially if you have high homocysteine. Everyone should make sure their blood pressure is in a healthy range, but especially if you have high homocysteine. High homocysteine plus high blood pressure equals 2,500% increased risk of heart attack or stroke. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and listen today, especially about something you may not be as excited about as I am. I do think it will make your future better. You are now smarter than a lot of doctors are about homocysteine. Look at you. Next time you're going to have a routine blood test, ask if they can check your homocysteine. You can drastically reduce your risk of super scary cardiovascular events and brain atrophy if yours comes back high by taking a few pretty easy steps to dig a little deeper into why your homocysteine is high. Fixing that at the root level might save your life. Next week, we're going to remind ourselves of a bunch of ways that we don't want to be normal. Until then, understand what homocysteine is really telling you and don't be normal. Thank you so much for tuning into the Health Courage Collective podcast. I am truly honored that you have paid me the enormous compliment of your time and attention. I would be so grateful if you would share this podcast with someone you know and subscribe so you never miss an episode. This podcast is for entertainment and information purposes only. Statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Christina Hackett and producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse events by use of information contained herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.